Okay.
So I wanted to welcome everybody to the Carolina Wetlands Association's webinar in celebration of our Wetland Treasures of the Carolinas. My name is Kim Matthews and I will be the moderator for our webinar today. I am also the Vice President of the Carolina Wetlands Association as a volunteer, and then I work as a research scientist for RTI International located in RTP right outside Raleigh and Durham. Our two presenters today are Rick Savage. He is the president of the Carolina Wetlands Association. Previously, before he retired, he was an employee of the state of North Carolina, where he was a wetland scientist in their wetland monitoring and assessment program with what was then known as the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And so he led a lot of the state's early work in the monitoring of our wetlands and assessment program. And our other presenter is Dr. Carrie Cavendish. She is our Wetland Treasures Coordinator. She is a graduate of the University of Florida Odom Center for Wetlands, and she is owner and president of Interface Environmental Consulting. And she is the mother of 3 young boys who may or may not make a surprise appearance today. And she's a lover of swamps and streams ecology. So we have this today as a 30-minute time spot. We have about a 20-minute presentation just to share information about the Wetland Treasures program, where you can find more information, and then we'd be happy to answer questions for you at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, you can type them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. So Rick, you're up first.
All right. Thank you, Kim. I'm glad to be here, glad to do this, and glad you guys all showed up. We want this to kind of be informative and fun, so let's just sort of get underway. Just going to kind of give some basic information on the program and how we select them, and the selection criteria, and kind of what makes our Wetland Treasures special. And then Carrie's going to pick it up with talking about their ecological significance and how they can be viewed in various ways, like how the wetland types and where they are and things like that. And then Kim will follow up with some information that's available on our website, which is very good, and it's a lot of information there. So moving along, our program is actually based on the Wisconsin Wetlands Association program, their GEMS program that they started years ago. We modeled it after that. We nominate or select 5 wetland treasures across the Carolinas each year. And it's during the month of May that we give tours at our wetland treasures that we select. And that's American Wetlands Month. So everybody here should know that by now. And of course, this year we weren't able to do that, but we do hope to schedule tours when it's safe to do so. And in this process, which takes a lot of work, to get all this information put together and so forth. So fact sheets are generated, and they are on our webpage, and they're very, very well done. And to continue, our wetland treasures are treasures because they give an opportunity for people to value wetlands. Their notification that they are valuable and need to be preserved. We have had several sites that actually asked us to make them wetland treasures, so that we could, so that would give more credence to the site that they manage, and keep them well preserved and protected and well managed. Which is the next point, is that they are managed, and we want to make sure that they continue to be well managed and enjoyed from a recreational perspective also, and also an educational perspective. And that's a lot of what our tours try to do, is to make sure that we all understand the value of wetlands and of the particular wetland that we are given a tour of at the time. And that, of course, all of this is a key component of our mission, to advocate for wetlands and their protection and restoration. So how are the wetland treasures selected? Well, the criteria is a little more detailed than I have here, but it's fairly straightforward. they have to have existing conservation efforts. They should be ecologically high quality. They should be important for protecting wildlife diversity and significant ecological services, providing significant ecological services. Excuse me. So they need to be high quality wetlands to be our treasures, and so we use that as a first measuring stick to see whether they meet our criteria to be selected as a wetland treasure. And we have plenty to select from, so usually that's not too much of a problem. So, for example, we have a lot of sources where we get potential sites. We have the unique wetlands that are designated such in North Carolina. We have the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources managed wetlands. And then we get recommendations from staff, from the state governments, from board members and supporters, and from the general public also. So we have a lot of opportunity to evaluate that. So some of the things that make them special, okay, other than the criteria, is that, you know, they are beautiful. I mean, I did wetlands work for 10 years, and I just fell in love with how beautiful they were. And can be. They provide valuable habitat for endangered species like the red wolf, for example. The Blackwater Swamp, the Black River Swamp in southeastern North Carolina, just a little above Wilmington. The Three Sisters area that's owned by the Nature Conservancy is one of our wetland treasures. I'm just really excited that the 5th oldest tree in the world has been found there. It's a bald cypress. It's about 2,600 plus years old, and it's an incredible treasure. And a few years ago, when I talked to David Staley, Dr. David Staley, who does that dating, he told me if we didn't make that site a wetland treasure, he was going to come after me. So the very next year, we made it a wetland treasure. And it was important. It's important to do that, to continue to give more and more emphasis on the need to protect them. And of course, so much wildlife depends on wetlands, and especially our amphibians. They typically lay eggs in wetlands, and that's what they're very dependent on. But food sources for birds and spawning for fish and so forth. So they're incredible habitats for our species. And at this point, let's let Carrie take it over. And Carrie, it's yours.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I want to talk a little bit more about the ecosystem services some of our wetland treasure sites provide, and how that plays into the site selection. So I know Rick previously discussed that they have to be under existing conservation easement, a high quality of type, biodiversity of rare species. But when we're considering sites, we also really like to think about what services they are providing, and then emphasize the importance and connectiveness of those features in a really tangible way by highlighting those, both for people that are really familiar with wetlands and supporters that may come out, and then of course people that may not be so familiar. So for example, this year we had a really great site. It's Botany Bay Plantation. It's a wildlife management area and historic preserve held by South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. It's within the Ace Basin, which is down in the lower Charleston County. It's one of the largest remaining relatively undeveloped wetland ecosystems. So we know how it provides in terms of flood protection and water quality and climate regulation, but these tours and fact sheets really give us a great way of conveying the message that they're also providing services in terms of recreation. A lot of cultural heritage is often associated with some of these larger sites. So with Botany Bay, there's rice production, there's different historic and archaeological resources on site, and then also emphasizing how important it is to food production and the seafood industry in that area. And so going to sites that offer sort of a plethora of different services really gives us an example of, or a way of showcasing these sites better to the general public. Another really cool site that we had come up this year was the Brogden Bottomland site. And this is a recent acquisition by Triangle Land Conservancy down in Johnson County, so in the Neuse River Basin, southeast of Raleigh. It's a fairly large undeveloped tract of land with undeveloped frontage along the Neuse River, and it really is a working wetland. So there's so much intense agricultural within the general vicinity, and then it's receiving all of the downstream inputs from the more developed RTP area. And so it's really significant in landscape context because so much is developed around it, and there's so much potential function at that site, so many different wetland types that occur there, and a real connectivity. We also like to highlight at our sites and think about highlighting sites that are exceptional examples of ongoing wetland research and management. So we know that wetlands research informs so much of how we treat stormwater and wastewater, how we observe land use change over time, climate change over time. And so it's really a pleasure to be able to explore sites where research is ongoing, and then opposingly on sites that may be newly acquired, building connections with smaller and local land trusts in terms of offering expertise for assessment and management as they go forward with that, holding that site in the future. Hey, Rick, can you switch to next slide? So here's what we've done so far. So since 2016, like Rick said, we try to highlight about 5 sites a year. We like to do a nice spread between North Carolina and South Carolina. And I was impressed when putting this map together because we've really been able to reach out and have supporters and do education at these sites really all across the Carolinas. We may in the future go back and do additional tours at sites that we have already we've already highlighted, and try to do more local and regional outreach and connect with smaller groups. That was going to be a really big focus this year. As we sort of geared up for our tours. Unfortunately, things have changed, but it's given us a really great opportunity to explore creating virtual materials and virtual tours online, which are also on our website and on YouTube. So as we move forward and thinking about Wetland Treasures for the following year, you'll see from the map that there's a large swath of Piedmont that we haven't really spent much time in. And so I was really glad to hear folks from Charlotte maybe on the phone call today, and different land conservancies within like the Yadkin and Catawba basins. And, you know, we'd really like to speak with you about important wetland sites within those areas and be able to address those. When I look at this map as well, it makes me think that we've begun to really form a primer or really a curriculum in wetlands education as well, that we can begin to make available for people to use and really build upon the efforts of Christy Giannopoulos and other folks within DEQ. We know that by getting young people especially the knowledge and understanding that they can begin to build an appreciation that leads to advocacy and protection. So hopefully moving forward we can continue to outreach and do educational activities at these sites. Next slide, Rick. And finally, it was just nice to sit and take a look and see what have we visited so far. You know, a lot of our Wetland Treasure sites have a multitude of wetland types, and these are given by NC-WAM wetland types. A multitude of wetland types on site, which is really great to see large intact complexes of different types of sites. And there are certain wetland types that we would like to potentially spend more time in the future. So I would love to see us moving toward highlighting some more smaller wetlands, maybe headwater forest systems, and different types of freshwater marshes, tidal and non-tidal, as we move forward. So that's really all I have for right now, but happy to answer any questions, and happy for Kim to speak about how our supporters can input to the selection process in the future and get involved.
Information about all the wetlands. So we do, Carrie showed you a map that she had created. On our website, we have an interactive map. So up here is our menu bar, and you go to Wetland Treasures, and you click right on Wetland Treasures, and it takes you to the screen that'll have this interactive map that it'll take you through. You can find information about all the wetlands. And then if you go onto some of the individual pages, you'll find that we have our videos posted. We have the links to our fact sheets, which are PDF documents, and then we also have links to other resources, to a lot of times the landowner, and then some of them have other associations that have provided materials. And especially if you want to go visit the sites, you would want to check the landowner sites to see what their access and hours are. And then go to the next slide, Rick. The last item on that menu pull down is a Wetland Treasures selection form. And so this is one of the ways that if you have a wetland site or treasure that we're not currently recognizing, go to our website and submit on this form some wetlands that you want us to consider for future programs. So every May is when we announce these wetland treasures for American Wetland Month. And so, but that work begins now. So as soon as we're done with this month, we're going to start preparing for which sites are we going to select next year. So this is just a way for you to help us with that process. So I will leave that up and we can open it up. You can there's some questions in the chat, and then we can also, you can unmute yourself now that we're done with our presentation, and you can ask the question yourselves. So Rick or Carrie, do you want to take a shot at answering the question from Madison about how will climate change affect the importance of wetland conservation? Especially like when we've had a lot of rain or when we have a drought.
I can talk about it a little bit, and Carrie can add to it, but I think that it becomes more important than ever because wetlands can mitigate a lot of the effects of climate change, especially flooding and sea level rise even. And so being sure that they are functioning properly and protected and have room, if you will, to perform those functions is going to be critical to helping mitigate some of these things. So that's my perspective. Carrie, you have anything to add to that? Carrie, you've muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I looked for comments and booted myself off of the Zoom talk. I'm sorry. Could you? What is the question that's being asked in the comment?
Climate change affecting the importance of wetland conservation. So I talked about how it's important for conserving and protecting our wetlands for mitigating flooding and sea level rise.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're discussing these sites and we're trying to highlight these sites, especially to the general public, it becomes really important not just to talk in terms of climate change and climate regulation, but again, to highlight those ecosystem services that are really tangible to people who are living in areas, especially in coastal areas. So speaking about flood protection and thinking about water quality, food production, how those can be integrated with agricultural land uses, I think that becomes really important. I'm not sure if I adequately answered that question though.
Oh, I think that's pretty complete. Jeremy Sweeve, who they probably pronounced his name wrong, but I know Jeremy, so he can yell at me later. But yeah, we do have a relationship with Highlands Biological Station actually, but we haven't really looked into the bogs around there, which I think is a great point. So they need to speak up on that, and that'd be great. But we did partner with them on a student loan deal about a year ago, which was very interesting. From Kim Hunter, can you share more about how the sites get selected? I understand you support tours, research. What else do you do? Carrie, why don't you handle that one?
Well, I can talk about the site selection. I'll have to get you to repeat the second part. So site selection begins somewhat informally. Myself and some colleagues, Rick and a couple other that aren't on the line today, Jessica Tisdale and Amin Davis, we've typically begun this by looking at, as we mentioned in the first part of the meeting, so unique wetlands, natural heritage sites. We've been in discussion with the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program and sites that they consider pretty significant on the landscape. Same with South Carolina. We don't have, as I guess, you know, we are sort of Raleigh centric, but we have some great contacts down there. And so we've worked a lot with South Carolina DNR to identify their managed wetlands where access and tours are obviously accessible, and where sites are being managed in a really great way. So we sort of have this working list. And so every year we really try to not bias ourselves to a certain location. So I'm always looking to highlight different physiographic regions of the state, make sure that we have some in North Carolina, some in South Carolina. And then we sort of have an informal outreach to those site managers. So if they haven't contacted us, generally we're contacting them and saying, hey, here's what our program's all about. How would you feel about highlighting your site and working with us and generating a fact sheet, which is often really useful for them. And then, of course, leading a tour, which can, be quite time consuming for people that are stretched pretty thin in their jobs in the public sector. But so far, we've really had great support from private and public entities. And so we'll kind of come back and have another informal meeting and present a good working list to our board and just continue with discussions from there.
And one of our new programs that we are just starting this summer, which has been delayed a little bit, at 3 of our wetland treasures around the Raleigh-Durham area, we are using those sites to implement a pilot of a wetland monitoring program. So we received grant funding to use volunteers to help us collect scientific data at some of these sites. So these could be potentially used for reference sites in the future, since these are in good condition and they're protected from future, at least, development impacts. And so that we could collect some long-term data. So looking at, hydrology, the vegetation, the different types of animals that use the site. And so after this 2 to 3 year pilot program, we hope to expand that to other wetland treasure sites.
Okay, more questions, guys.
You can unmute yourselves and please ask a question. We'd love to hear from you.
One of the things that I'll mention too that we're thinking about with our wetland treasures too is that we are trying to maintain a relationship with these wetland treasures through time, and that's been a little harder to do. So, but we want to continue to have them highlighted and recognized as treasures, and so we're trying to encourage some of the managers to maybe write stories for our newsletter to tell us what's going on, so we can highlight it and potentially do repeat tours also. And so I think that'll be coming along soon. We'll do more of that. And I think another thing is that, as Kim says, that these treasures are, we are getting ready to start a volunteer monitoring program. And so these treasures have the real value of producing reference data and hopefully can be used by other scientists, wetland scientists, to compare their research with data collected from these wetland treasure sites. So this is pretty exciting, I think.
Hey, Carrie, do you want to take the question? Do you ever work with master naturalist programs in South Carolina or North Carolina?
I don't. So I should say I've been leading the Wetland Treasures program for about 2 years now, and I don't think so. I want to say it sounds somewhat familiar, and I know we have done outreach to Native Plant Society, but master naturalist, I don't think so.
Kim, actually, I have.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the South Carolina master naturalist, it was a part of the section in the northeast section along the Charleston Myrtle Beach corridor. I actually was invited to give a presentation to them. So we've maintained a contact with them too. And so yeah, we've had some relationship with the ones in South Carolina, oddly enough, not so much in North Carolina. So that is something.
Maddie replied that she doesn't think North Carolina has a master naturalist. So maybe that we're not missing North Carolina. Maybe one does not exist. So maybe it's something we could add, Carrie, for that, to reach out to the South Carolina for this next year's wetlands. And I can answer, I think, are all of the wetland treasures open to the public? I would say yes. Some of them you may only be at certain times. And some of them you may need to have most of them you can visit, but there's a couple that only have certain times that you can tour them. And the newest one this year, that Brogden Bottomlands, was just purchased by the Triangle Land Conservancy in 2019. So it doesn't have trails, it hasn't been developed, but it will be open to the public in the future. Is that correct, Carrie?
Yes, that's correct. They don't know quite when that's going to happen, and I think, yes, I agree. I think most of the sites are generally open to the public. We had one, Bluff Mountain Fen here in Ashe County, that you've got to coordinate. They do small group tours because a lot of them are very sensitive. So you've got to do a reservation in the summertime. But they lead a great tour through that site if you're ever in the North Carolina mountains. It's fantastic and can be accessed via like the Nature Conservancy's organization and county stewards.
And that is one of the criteria that we are trying to find places that are publicly accessible, because we're promoting these as places to go visit as exemplary wetlands. So that is consideration for the selection into the program.
Sure.
I have a comment. If you all can hear me, I don't know.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yes, I have a comment. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Jock Stender and I'm in Charleston. I'm a lepidopterist, a butterfly person, and the Carolina Butterfly Society, we don't have that many members in the Low Country anymore, mostly in the Midlands, and all of our butterfly walks, and there were like 10 of maybe 15 of them, they've all been canceled this year because of this is a national forest and this was closed. They were all turned off terminated like 2 weeks ago. But if you could mention any sites that are populated, especially with butterflies, you know, I'd like to know. There's one of my favorite places is just south of McClellanville, where there's a lot of passion flower growing in spoils area. They like sandy soil, and there's just a gazillion butterflies there, and it's a place where I like to go with friends who can, what do you call it, be distant and go out and see things without, you know, in like in a walk like that where it's not dangerous. Get outside. So just a question about butterflies, if there's anything that comes to mind, any of these places.
Yeah, from my perspective, not right off the bat, but that's a good question. We probably got people that could answer that, so we'll have to refer to those. But one thing I will say that I found interesting is that in Congaree, in South Carolina, it's well known for its fireflies, and a national firefly researcher has been spending a lot of time there. In fact, they contacted us too to let us know what they were doing and see if there was anything that we wanted them to do. But apparently they go there and watch some synchronization of the fireflies go through, which is apparently, from what I understand, is just beautiful. So
I think I know one site. It doesn't often come up, butterflies, but it's interesting you ask that. So we do have one site this year that hosts a rare butterfly. I'm reading right now. It does. It's Panthertown Valley Bog, which is over in Jackson County, North Carolina, so west of Asheville. And that's what they see. Yes, so they host the rare Baltimore checker spot butterfly, and I think there's some gray comma occurrence in the area as well. So I think that's the first time it's come up, but that will be an interesting one to visit in the future.
Okay, thanks.
And Sherry, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, and it may be a stupid one, but my question is, you know, we have a lot of retention ponds because we're having a lot of development, especially this area I live in, which is a coastal area, Wilmington. And basically, these retention ponds, I tried to talk to the developers to do something more environmental, but they just dig the pond. Is there any way that we can convince them to at least incorporate these retention ponds into a man-made wetland? Is that feasible, or is the stormwater going to be a issue?
well, that's something that, you know, we don't get directly involved in, but it is something we do try to promote very strongly, and using nature-based solutions and to actually do, like you said, a wetland and rather than just a retention pond, because they're much more efficient and they're pretty when you do that, and they really do their job. So other than education, that would be the main thing right now is to do that. And we did have an article in our newsletter by Amin Davis on nature-based solutions, and if you haven't seen that, that's a resource I'd say go to initially, and we can probably give more resources if you're interested. But directly as an organization, we just have to promote it in a general sense.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're a few minutes over our time, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time and just really say thank you for attending. We have recorded this session, and once it's posted on the website, I'll send an email out to all participants so you can go and refer back to it, and we'll also send you probably just a few other resources you can find on our website. But please, we are always looking for suggestions about news and information about wetlands, just not the Wetland Treasures program. But other wetland concerns or happenings going on, and so please help us spread the word about our organization and the community we're trying to foster. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you Rick and Carrie for a good presentation today.
And thank you, Kim.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming.